Let me ask you a question. What is it that you're trying to control that God wants you to surrender? Our God can do way more through your surrender than you can ever do through your control. He can do way more. That which is on your heart is always better in his hand. You don't always have the power to control, but you do always have the power to surrender. And I promise you, God can do way more through your surrender than you can ever do through your control.
Where are you fighting God for control in your life right now? If you're like me, if you're like most of us, there's an area or two at least where we're still fighting with God for control. It may be that God's calling you to let go of something. Maybe it's something bad. Maybe there's a sin in your life that God's calling you to let go. Maybe it's something good that you're holding on to, and he says, I've got something better for you, but you're going to have to trust me. You're going to have to let me rule. And we're fighting him for control. And so when we have those places in our lives where we're fighting God for control, we have to learn to let go and trust him.
If we want to step into the future that God has for us at any age, we also have to be willing to let something go. A lot of times this just means letting go of our strong desire to be in control. It's not easy. We honestly think we know what is best for us. We know the plans that we have, and we'll submit them to God, and we'll say, God, this is what's best for me, and I'm going to ask you to bless this, and I'm going to ask you to lead me in this. But we have to be willing to let go of our plans and just ask God to lead us into his future. It doesn't mean we don't plan. It doesn't mean we don't think strategically. It doesn't mean we don't use our wisdom and judgment to move into the future. It's just we have to be willing to humble ourselves before God and ask God to direct our steps instead of asking God to bless the steps we want to take. You see, when I was in control, at times I made a mess of my life. But when I trusted God, what I have found is that God was faithful.
My desire to control is rooted in a lack of faith. The more I find myself trying to control, the more I overestimate my ability to control, the more I underestimate the power and the goodness of God. A simple thought to remember, but not a simple thought to live. To live this out, it takes faith. But on the other side of your faith, let me promise you, you will always see the faithfulness of God, the God who is with you.
2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 says, "For we live by faith, not by sight." We want to live that way. We want to follow it. We want to trust it. But the reality is that more often than not, we want to really live by sight and not by faith. But if we're willing to let go of that sight, then there are blessings of faith that come to us. But it's a struggle. We have to let go of our need to be in control, let go of what we can see.
Because you never see all that God is doing when you're looking at it. You only see that piece that he wants to show you right now. You say, why won't you show me the whole thing? So that you learn to walk by faith and not by sight.
If you're trying to control the outcome and control the time frame, you're going to live worried. You have to release control. Release having to have it happen your way. God already has it figured out. He knows the end from the beginning. But here's the key. He doesn't give us the details. If you knew how everything was going to work out, it wouldn't take faith. If he told you 3 months from now a big door is going to open, It looks like you're going backwards, but there's a shortcut that's going to put you ahead. You would relax and say, okay, it's all going to work out. Why don't you do that now? God has it all planned out. He's doing things you can't see. There are good breaks coming, healing, favor, the right people. They're already on your schedule. If you'll release control, then you can enjoy your life while you're waiting for things to change. What's upsetting you? What's keeping you awake at night? God is saying, release it to me. I'm in control. I'm ordering your steps. I'm working behind the scenes. It may not be good, but I'm going to turn it for your good.
We know the master. We don't always know the master plan. God is in control. Doesn't always look like it, but God is in control. That God is with you. You're never alone. And that God is for you. When life feels so out of control, God is in control, no matter how things appear.
You know, as followers of Jesus, and I think a lot of us, we know that God's in control in our heads, right? The problem is sometimes there's a gap between what we know in our heads and what we feel in our hearts, our ability to relax into that knowledge that God's in control. And so the question that we need to ask ourselves is this: how can we move our trust in God from our heads to our hearts? Listen to me. You want to move your trust from God from your head and into your heart? You want to go from what we know to be true, that God's in control, to really feeling it? Here's what we need to focus on. We know God's in control because He turns obstacles into opportunities. He turns obstacles into opportunities. Those things that look like they're opposing His will, He uses to accomplish it. We see that throughout Scripture. These things might have looked like obstacles to God's will, but the reality is He's turned them into opportunities to do even greater things. Listen to me. We know that God's in control because He turns obstacles into opportunities. Because listen, church, the only safe way through chaos is trusting the only one who has true control. It's the only way through chaos when it comes to calling. It's trusting the only one who really has control. We have an illusion of control. We think, well, I could do this, I could do that, I could get control of things. But the reality is we're spitting into the wind. We don't have any real control. And the people we look to, well, maybe they can control. No, they don't have that ability. Only God has true control. And only God can control you in a way that blesses you. The only way through chaos, the only safe way through chaos, is trusting the only one who has true control.
It's hard when you feel as if there's a situation going on and there's very little that you can do about it. But I just wanted you to know, if you feel as if life is out of control, if you feel as if that God is not listening, I want to remind you, never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. Don't be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. And so when I cannot control something, when it's out with my control, I'm not going to panic. You'll discover you don't have to fear the future because you know who your Father is and that He is with you in the future.
So I wonder today, how is God calling you to trust Him? Where is God calling you to stop fighting Him for control? Our control issues can turn even our greatest blessings toxic. Our attempt to control our kids can drive our kids away. Our attempt to control our spouse can end up creating a wedge between us so the marriage just fragments and it turns into something we never dreamed it would look like. Our attempts to control other people spoils the relationships. Listen, control issues can turn even our greatest blessings toxic. Control issues. They're stirred up by that fear of losing the blessing, because here's the thing. Listen, fear is rocket fuel for control issues. This is one of the big places that our control issues come from. They come from fear of losing something that we've come to cherish, something that we've come to depend on, something that God has blessed us with. And I think this is actually very helpful in our own lives. It's also helpful as we look at other people. You might be in a relationship with somebody that feels pretty controlling. And it's easy to think, well, they're controlling because they're just bad people. But the reality is, fear is rocket fuel for our control issues. And it may very well be that the people who are trying to control you are actually people who are afraid of losing you. And you're like, well, this is a terrible way to show it. Yeah, I didn't say it was a good idea. But it's a very common issue, because when chaos comes calling, or when we think chaos might come calling, when we might lose a blessing, our control issues get stirred up. They get triggered, right? Fear is rocket fuel for our control issues. And I wonder, is there a blessing you're afraid of losing that's fueling your control issues? Is there something God has blessed you with? And there's a fear inside you that you might somehow lose it, and that's driving you to try to control it or to control them. But what's the alternative? The alternative is trust. The alternative is trusting the only one who has true control, because God's greatest blessings can't be seized. They can't be taken through control. They can only be received in a posture of trust. Because again, the blessings of God aren't rewards, they're gifts.
We try to control our own future, and all we're going to end up doing is worrying about how we're going to provide for it, how we're going to see it happen. What Jesus is saying, the key, the answer is to really just trust God for everything, and God will provide it. See, when we're willing to step out in faith, when we're willing to trust God, God will bless us.
But what I've discovered now is it's a beautiful thing that God will do with a broken life if you give him all the pieces. It's a beautiful thing that God will do if you give him all the pieces. Not only that, God is with you even when you can't see his plan.